it's like built into the law that thou shalt party. I mean, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks podcast. I'm Brian Shealy.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much everyone for tuning in. You know, we are one of the most hyper-connected generations in human history. Yet, we seem to be suffering through an epidemic of loneliness. We've learned how to project ourselves through our avatars and our social media presences, but have we forgotten how to share ourselves with each other over a meal?
Today, we're looking at why God does some of his best work at a table. From the abundance of Eden to the subversive banquets of Jesus, we're exploring how the simple act of breaking bread is actually a radical act of kingdom warfare. It's time to take the veil off our digital lives and pull up a chair to the family table.
Okay, so I recently did a couple of sermons on the idea of the table and why the table is so important. And I know that recently, not too long ago, you did a series of lessons on ordinary holiness, and one of those conversations was about food and how we can treat ordinary food, everyday food, like a holy thing from God, a blessing, a gift from God. And I thought it'd be interesting for us to just kind of talk about this idea of the table, because you and I are remotely accessing each other's presence through the internet, but that didn't happen in the first century, nor did it happen even 20 years ago. People, when they wanted to get in touch with each other, they had to travel. And so I think sometimes in our modern society, we've lost touch with people, and just reclaiming this idea of physical presence and being with each other and, being in each other's presence is so important. So let's maybe talk about that remotely through the power of Zoom here.
Now you got me wanting to connect like Ezekiel ending up in the temple from Babylon, and not without miraculous help from God or a vision or something to people access remotely. But the other aspect of this, just to take it to full Bible geekness, the other aspect of this is the food aspect, which you can be in someone's presence, but there's something, like where you're not really showing up, you're sort of there.
Yeah.
You could be digitally present like we are with each other and really present, or you can show up halfway like the family that's, all on their phones eating together, but not really with each other. And there's something about sitting at a table and breaking bread together that done rightly, and I don't even mean like it's some complicated thing, but just like done with the purpose of enjoying each other, like we do say at a holiday or at a good family dinner or something like that, has this power to connect us in a way that very few things really do.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I appreciate the idea of food, and it is like, as I was studying through in preparation for these lessons, I was shocked how many moments in the Bible story are just like laced with food. I mean, they're at the table so often. They're like eating together and having meals and enjoying. And of course, it all starts in the very beginning, right? Genesis. Suddenly, these two new humans have been placed into this lush garden full of abundance, and they can eat and they can flourish and they can be with each other and be fruitful and multiply and all the things that they experience. And then quickly they are protecting themselves and hiding and all of the things that have been taken away from them. And they're no longer in God's presence where this great feast and abundance is. It's like presence with God should be this enjoyable moment where they get to be with each other and experience God's amazing abundance. But like, what's the difference between a party that's a stinker where you truly feel like you belong and you can let loose and be yourself, and one that's just kind of flat? Have you ever been to a stinker of a party?
Definitely. Yes. Many times. And you can only do so much to elevate things by yourself.
Yeah.
And if you are out of your environment, like it's one thing if you are hosting, or even like, if somebody comes into the North Church building, in some ways I feel almost like a host, not that it's a party, but like that people come in and I am enough in my element that I can try to bring them in and make them feel at home and create connection. Or obviously if somebody comes to my house or something like that. But there are places and situations where everybody is so closed off and it's not your world and you can only do so much. You show up at a say a wedding and you don't really know people that well and everybody is just kind of uncomfortable themselves.
Yeah.
And you can't break through. And so you're like, get me out of here. What is going on? I'm just going to try to be cordial, be appropriate, celebrate with people, but nobody actually wants to connect. So why would I try to force that on them?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like I have this moment where I feel responsible for making a party, be a place where people can feel comfortable and things like that. And boy, we're going to talk about it in a little while, but I struggle very personally with the idea of entertaining and how that relates to hospitality. I feel like sometimes I have to be the entertainer, right? Like I have to be the one who is coordinating everything, getting everybody together. And I just struggle so much with the idea of having to entertain people. And I find it very hard to let loose when I feel like I'm in that hosting position. But yeah, I've been to plenty of parties that actually my least favorite parties, just if we could get real here with each other, my least favorite parties are the ones where like somebody has assigned my seat at the table and they've coordinated activities for me ahead of time. I hate those parties. I'm just, if you want to invite me to those parties, that's awesome. I really appreciate you very much. But like my ideal party is where people can just feel warm and comfortable and talking with each other and sharing life. But if you tell me where to sit and which games I have to play, then okay. I mean, I guess that's fine too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you sit at a table and whoever you're with, especially when there's a depth of relationship there to begin with, but even if not, that table becomes its own little mini party because this is, again, the joy of sharing at a table that the Bible talks about a lot. I think of Taylor's wedding, Taylor and Silas's wedding.
Yeah.
That you showed up in Oregon. I showed up at, I think, Ryan and Rebecca were there, right?
Yeah.
And the Goodwins and all these people that we love showing up, and you just kind of lose yourself in catching up and enjoying as you're breaking bread together. That's a party that I want to be at, right?
That absolutely was a party, and I love those very much. It is interesting though. We've been talking a little bit here, but let's get specific about it. It's amazing to me how many times throughout the Bible that food is involved in the story. And of course, here in Genesis, they're eating from the wrong tree, which I would sort of argue is like kind of the first meal that's inappropriate or whatever. But like as they're booted out of God's presence, the idea there that now God is always trying to bring people back to the table, which is where we'll eventually head in this conversation, I think. But I feel like then you get to passages like, well, even like the offerings, right? The peace offerings in Leviticus 7, which was, by the way, such a cool offering of all of the offerings that were made, of all of the sacrifices that were made. This one, was about celebration. It was a whole offering of all about, getting back the meat that you gave and having a party. Like there was it said in Leviticus 7 verse 15 that the meat must be eaten on the day it is offered. It's like, yeah, okay, have a barbecue, have a party. Like it's time. Enjoy yourself. And just that God would command celebration, that he would command these days, kind of like, this peace, this almost Sabbath in a way, kind of like a resting from your work and enjoying the community together with your people.
It's such a cool picture. Yeah, there's a lot of offerings that the priests would have some part of, but this is the one that the worshiper would offer, and it's sometimes called not just the peace offering, but sometimes, or the shalom, but but like it's a fellowship offering, which is
Right.
another way of understanding this idea of you are offering this and enjoying it with the Lord. You take it in the presence of the Lord. You're connecting with one another and with the God you're worshiping. And that becomes this major theme that will develop, not just connection with each other in meals, but connections with God. And I love your emphasis on celebration. And there was, I don't know if you had it set aside to talk about, we don't need to get into this deep, but there was one of the tithes, like a separate tithe that they were setting aside for whenever you needed to have the celebration. God is ensuring in his laws, you have some money set aside so that when you get to the, Jerusalem or wherever to have the party, you have the provisions to make sure you can all celebrate together.
I hadn't even thought about talking about that, but I do. It is amazing. Like it's like built into the law that thou shalt party. I mean, pretty much as an instruction from God. When I was pulling out some of these like table references as I was looking through, really fast forward here, we're going to talk about Luke 24 and how Jesus, is made visible or made known to his disciples at a table, which I think is really amazing, but we'll get there. I was looking at table references and how many times this concept was brought up, and I was brought back to something that I think I'd pushed out of my mind for a very long time, which was the construction of the tabernacle. And if you'll remember, in the construction of the tabernacle, in the holy place, the first room inside of the tent itself, not the most holy place where the ark was, but the room right before that, there was a table there that was always, stocked with bread, warm bread, that was always before the Lord. And the idea that the word, I guess, that's used there in Hebrew is literally translated bread of the face, which I love so much because we also refer to it as the bread of presence. But basically, the idea was that this bread was always before the Lord. It was always before his face. And I thought it was so cool thinking about that concept that God, even in his own worship, designed food to be a part of it, designed this idea that we're in his presence, that we're sharing these things together with him. And, God has always been about building community. And, the thou shalt party and the all the laws about, festivals and things that he gave were always about making sure that people were connected with each other, but also most importantly with him.
Yeah, there's an awesome book I'll get to you so we can put it in the show notes that goes through a biblical study of a biblical theology of Leviticus that argues really well, I think, that the center and climax of the book of Leviticus is the section where it talks about the lampstands shining on the showbread, the table, as the main focus. Like the whole thing is, in a way, about communing with God. That's what the tabernacle is. That's what priesthood is. That's what the sacrifices are allowing. And so the priests who are serving before the Lord and making sure that there's this bread there, and of course they're to eat it in a particular, in a holy place, and all of this is developing the idea that ultimately God wants to be with us. He wants to enjoy fellowship with us, and we'll end at the book of Revelation. But one passage you didn't put in there that I'll just bring up now, even though we're jumping ahead, is in Revelation 3, at the end of the chapter, when Jesus is knocking at the door.
Yeah.
And if anyone lets him in, behold, I will come in and will dine with him. I'm going to eat with him. If you open the door to Jesus knocking at the door, he's going to eat with you. What in the world is that about? Well, it's about what God has always been trying to do. And Jesus wants to enter. It's not about, say a sinner's prayer for him to receive him into your heart. It's about he wants to live with you in communion and share with you in not just in a work project, it's that, not just in a grace project that he's growing you in, but in just sharing.
Yeah.
Like God shares with himself, God, Father, Son, and Spirit. He wants to share with us. And that's what all of this is pointing to.
Yeah. And of course, there's so many examples. I love the one
I know.
in Revelation, of course. But, you're talking about Jesus and eating with people. And I think maybe it would be helpful for us to then fast forward in the story as we move to where Jesus is eating with outcasts and sinners. And
Yes.
I mean, the fact that people referenced Jesus and like summarized his ministry as if like the Son of Man came eating and drinking, like that's how Jesus would, qualify the way that they had all talked about him. Like Jesus is always eating. And don't we see that? Like he is very frequently eating with people and sitting at the table with sinners. And that's really the part of this conversation that's so shocking is that Jesus is eating with sinners. And, there are so many ways we could take this, but Jesus wasn't just like being nice. He was using these parties to inaugurate his new kingdom, to inaugurate the fact that he, as the king, was going to welcome these people back to the table. Like this was the start of something really important. And this would have been completely shocking at the time, right? That Jesus, the king, would have been eating with these sinners. And even just like, not him being the king, but like, you didn't eat with people who were below your status. Like, whoever you ate with, whoever you spent your time with, gift giving and all of these other things had such a tight correlation with your social rank and status. And for Jesus to eat with these sinners was obviously the reason why the Pharisees were so shocked. Like, doesn't he know who these people are and what they've done? And I love that Jesus is flipping the table on whatever's going on here. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really neat point about the honor shame aspect and who you're bringing to the table. You think of the parables of inviting, go into all the off the beaten road, bring in all the criminals, the poor, the outcasts. And with the Pharisees, there's this idea of fellowship in the covenant community. Who you eat with says who is accepted and who you consider your people. And Jesus is saying, they're with me.
Oh yeah.
I'm with them. This is what is so shocking about the Pharisees. Jesus is in some ways most like the Pharisees in his outward lifestyle and his position and his holiness and that kind of thing. At least they're teaching the importance of holiness and saying it's important and outwardly doing this. Of course, he convicts them of their hypocrisy and of so many twisted up things that they have gotten mixed up on. But they're kind of viewing him. Simon invites Jesus as a Pharisee. He invites Jesus to come and eat with him because he's saying, you're one of us, you're one of mine. But Jesus says, this woman that's behind me washing my feet, she's one of mine. I'm with her. And you actually are part of an issue. And so, we talk in the church sometimes about table fellowship from the standpoint, not just of the Lord's Supper, but of, 1 Corinthians 5, 2 Thessalonians 3, with such a one, do not even eat whenever someone has rebelled against the faith in an ongoing lifestyle while they are saying they are a Christian and trying to identify among us. And there's a point where if they continue on, we have to say, we can't invite you to the table and act like everything is okay and act like we are of one whole. And yet Jesus is using the table as a moment, as a place to invite others into transformation. And so it becomes this powerful place. And I think you even said something like this in your notes. It's like as an evangelism tool.
Yeah.
Like a place for transformation.
Yeah. Well, and you talk about that, like it just struck me that how much Jesus, like he aligned with the Pharisees morally, but they hated him so much. But like he was so out of sync morally with the people he was eating with at the table, but they loved him so much And
Yeah.
like just the flip there of how Jesus related to people that were just so different than him. And yet he used that as these moments to really teach them and guide them and shepherd them. And as he would talk about, be a physician to them and heal them. And I love that picture of just the best, relating to the least. And I don't know, it was also making me think of Philemon and Onesimus' story, how shocking it would have been for, and I think it's why Paul is having to even deal with this in the first place, is like, here it is, a master and a slave relationship, and yet these guys are welcome at the same table. I mean, they're welcome to be together, and, in Christ's eyes, there's none of them are better than the other one. Like, for this to be the relationship that we now have, it just changes the game so much. And for us to see that this is what Jesus was coming to do, is to bring us back and to be the one who welcomes us to the table, and we come and fellowship with him and fellowship with each other. It's just such a blessing. I mean, like, this is the gift, right? This is grace that we even have this opportunity given who we are and what we've done.
Think of Galatians 2.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Paul straightening Peter out
Yes.
because he won't eat with other Christians, but they're Gentiles. And there's some variance, it seems, in how different Jews of that time would draw the lines of how much association they would have with Gentiles. But, Peter's a very strict Jewish guy coming up. I've never touched anything unclean. And yet here, even after the conversion of Cornelius, he is struggling to sit at the same table with these Gentile believers who are trying to turn their whole lives over to Christ, who he has helped convert probably. He is part of the leadership group that they're following.
Yeah.
And it just shows you how unique and special the table is as this expression of fellowship and of sharing. That no, I've got to create a distance there, Peter is saying, and Paul has to confront it. This isn't something he can let slide, because the whole gospel is at stake in seeing the incongruity of God's grace is not in, well, this group deserves it and this group doesn't.
Yes.
It's in, all of us are so far away from deserving it that we just see each other as, like we've used the metaphor before, as a bunch of beggars telling each other where you can find bread. We are just all so overwhelmingly out of our class in eating at God's table that I have no right to not invite somebody else to come and sit at that table with me.
I don't know. Can I throw a hot take in here, middle of the lesson here?
Ooh, been a while since we had a hot take.
Oh, nah, here we go. So I think sometimes we, as more, I'll say, conservatively minded Christians, take that for whatever you want, we have placed a very specific role on acts of worship and what we do when we're collected together. And one of those things has historically not been table fellowship that doesn't involve the Lord's Supper. Like, it's just taking the Lord's Supper together, and that's what we do as part of worship. And we maybe look at churches or other places that may make their gatherings into a more social environment negatively. But I think Jesus wants us to see that we don't fulfill what the kingdom was designed to be without our own personal tables. And I go to Acts 2 to see the response of the early church with each other and to each other, like the way that they were so physically connected to each other in the early church. After they gave their lives to Christ, they were baptized, they come up out of the waters, and what do? They're eating with each other. They're fellowshipping with each other in their homes. They're with each other, selling their possessions, yes, and doing all these things to support those who were needy among them. But they were like day by day house to house in each other's homes. And that, for me, cannot be pushed out of what we define our churches as because we're uncomfortable with the idea of it or something like that. Like, that has to be who we are as the church, as people who open up our homes and connect with people over meals. That's what Jesus did. And like, I think my point in the lesson that I gave was that it was not like the early church was not enacting some like really clever church growth strategy by opening up their homes. All they were doing was following the example of Jesus. And that's what discipleship is, right? It's just going about doing the things Jesus did. And he ate with people, we eat with people. He welcomed outsiders to his table, and we welcome outsiders to our table. Like, it's what we should be about. And I think when you talk about evangelism tools, that was one of the things I know, and I'm certain of it. That was one of the things that helped the early church to grow. And we can put a lot of asterisks and caveats on like, oh, well, let's not, the social gospel and all of these other things. I get that. But like, the table is so important when it comes to what we can do for the world.
And we've talked before about, let's not put too hard of a break between evangelism and discipling, like making disciples. That's the whole goal. And it continues on after somebody's baptized. It's not like, okay, good job, go and do likewise. It's the process is basically the same. You're bringing people closer to Jesus constantly. And that happens at the table. That was happening in Acts 2 and Acts 2 through 6, we see it, but throughout the Bible. And this is where in my life, the good stuff happens.
Yes.
Like, this is where we talk about, meet with a young couple and talk about marriage, or think through somebody who's struggling with the evidences and should I really believe in these things, or somebody who's dealing with, sin or whatever, like helping people grow, or just the fun conversations like what we're having. This is what happens at a table with Christians, whether that's you're inviting somebody over, or you're meeting somebody for lunch, or you're at a potluck, or you're whatever. Like, this is life together, and it is ongoingly about edifying one another, whether that's by me listening to you and your troubles and mourning with you and laughing with you, or it's me helping you think through some theological issue. I mean, it all gets mixed up together. And I'm not, this isn't a discussion about the work of the church as a collective unit or anything like that. The point is, if this is not part of what we are equipping the church to do and seeing as part of Christ's vision for the church, then we are not reading Acts 2 well. And Acts, this whole picture of what early Christianity was, because there is not much detail about the early church given in Luke's history here of the early church. But he goes out of his way again and again to talk about two different kinds of breaking bread at the sacred table of Christ, where we are remembering him, and breaking bread every day, ongoingly, constantly, as we share our lives together.
Amen. And boy, this is why you were on this podcast, because I throw a hot take out there and you just like polish it up all nicely. That's what I was trying to say. And I think it's so good that, we can just lean into the idea that the table is important. It was important all the way back from the beginning, all the way to the end of the Bible. And it's important throughout all of what we see the early church doing. And I think, they didn't have the problem that we have today. But I think one of the big challenges that we have today, especially, is like, we are the most connected generation, I think, than has ever been. When I preached this lesson for the very first time, there was somebody on the front row had a phone up, and one of the brothers who was in the hospital, laying in a hospital bed, was doing a Zoom and was able to listen to the lesson like there while we were I was basically preaching this lesson to a guy miles away who was able to tune in remotely. Like, we're so connected through technology, through all the means that we have at our disposal. But I think we are probably one of the loneliest generations that's ever existed, because this idea of community and being with each other is so elusive to us now that we can hide behind our phones, we can hide behind our avatars and our like social media presence and our like perfectly curated lives that we put out there. And I know there's been a lot of stuff said about this, but you were just talking about it, right? A bunch of people sitting around at the table, staring at their phones, texting each other or texting other people while they're in each other's presence. It is a real problem that we have to deal with. And I don't think you can be truly at the table and disconnected in that way. Like, there's something about being in each other's physical presence that helps us to remove the veil and drop the show and just be real with each other, because we don't get to polish ourselves or like curate that experience in the ways that we do with technology.
That's another hot take, I think. I mean, maybe like you said, it's been said before, but we're so connected and yet so disconnected. And then putting into that understood problem, here's a way of dealing with that. Eat together.
Yeah.
Like, so basic.
It is.
But it is biblical. It is really, really all through the Bible, and maybe part of the story of what is so special that happens there takes us back from the place where you started in Genesis, and this abundance that God provides, and then trying to find something else that is not what God's providing. And then seeing in this picture we were talking about coming to the table of God's grace and God's blessing. And what do we do before we break bread? What does Jesus do? To take it to where I think you're going next. What does Jesus do before he breaks bread, as the father at a Jewish table would do, actually breaking a loaf? First, you give thanks. This is a place where we together gratefully enjoy God's blessings to sustain our lives, as we recognize that he's the one who brings the good stuff in life. And then we enjoy each other as part of that good life.
We talk about mindfulness a lot in our conversations. I think it's like maybe one of the buzzwords of the podcast, or at least it has been over the years.
Yeah.
And that is the idea here, really. It's just being aware of each other, being open to each other, being vulnerable with each other, but being mindful of God's blessing is such a helpful reminder. And how better can you be mindful of that than to eat and enjoy? And like, that is like the blessing of food, right? That's the blessing of what God has given us. That's why food was such a part of his worship. I mean, early on, like in tabernacle worship, in our worship today. I mean, the Lord's Supper, taking that meal together that Jesus demonstrated for us. There's a reason why food is at the center of what we do, because it helps us remember that God is the one who blesses us. I mean, the Lord's Prayer, right? It's baked into the Lord's Prayer. Give us this day,
no pun intended,
our daily bread, right? Pun intended, man. He baked it. But I just feel like if you can see the blessing that God is constantly pouring out into your life, that gratitude just changes the game. It changes how we live in deep ways, and it connects us with each other in ways that, like, we all just know. We know what it's like to sit at a table with people and eat. And that's like the fundamental foil that we use in like getting together. It's like, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to eat. Okay, sign me up. I'll be there.
Adrian and I were watching a show last night that I don't even know if I can recommend it, but it's just a basic show about a doctor. And he has moved to Maine, and all week long they're talking about this meal. Well, we got to have the baked bean supper. We got to have the baked bean supper. Baked bean supper is what I look forward to all month. Every month you get together every month. The whole town gets together for a baked bean supper, and then they're sitting down and they're eating together. And one of the ladies says to the main character, look around. Do you get it? And it's like, it's not about the delicious brown bread. It's not about the baked beans. It's about the connection.
Yeah.
And the food is a blessing you enjoy together. Food is great. We love food.
Yeah.
But to share food together is a fundamental human experience that it's about, like, you know, we've been talking about being known and seen in the Hagar episode, or about, you know, just being loved and being able to be yourself, and where you started with the stinky party versus like the good party is where you're sitting at, you know, a dumb baked bean, you know, town supper, but everybody is sharing life and stopping everything else. The business of life has ceased.
Yeah.
Just to enjoy something gratefully before God.
Yeah. And that's really where we're headed here. The whole lesson that I had was really focused on this passage, Luke 24. And we know it. We've talked about it at length, you know, many times here on the podcast. But Luke 24, as Jesus is raised from the dead, he is appearing to these two disciples who have no clue who he is. Just the most amazing story. But Jesus teaches them on the road, and he talks to them, and their hearts are burning within their chest, and they're like, but they still, I love the point that they still don't know who he is through his teaching. And like, I made the point in my sermon that like a great sermon is awesome, but it's not the whole story. And Jesus was not made visible to them. Their eyes had not been yet opened just because he taught them. Their eyes were opened after he took the bread, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it to them. 4 really important verbs that throw all the way back, like you were saying, to the institution of the Lord's Supper. He took it, he blessed it, he broke it, he gave it, and then their eyes were opened. And then he disappears, which is my favorite part of the story. But, you know, that all happened at the table. That all happened when they were together with each other, right across, sharing this intimate moment with each other. And that's when they knew who he was. And so, it takes both. It takes Jesus knowing about him and being taught by him and sitting at his feet and our hearts burning when we hear him. But it takes a presence with him. It takes being back to the table with him and in a relationship with him, that both of those combined let us see what this is really all about.
Dude, you are blowing my mind here. This is that preaches right there what you just said. That is so good. I mean, I've read this passage so many times. I love it so much, as you know. And he opened to us the scriptures, and our hearts were burning within us. But our eyes weren't opened until we sat down and ate with him. Going back to Revelation 3, which is not about a literal meal that they had. They had a literal meal with it, but about fellowship.
Yeah.
Like the point, the scriptures are amazing. And to get who he is through the scriptures is amazing. But that is not the point. The point is to get through the scriptures to seeing Jesus and to knowing him and to eating with him.
I had this picture in my sermon, which I really loved. It was basically Eve handing Adam the fruit in the garden. And then it was Jesus' handing bread to the other disciples side by side with each other. And it just had the words, their eyes were opened. Because that's Genesis 3, right?
Yes.
This language of what's going on here is the language of Genesis 3. And Luke is throwing all the way back to that story, saying that like, when their eyes were opened in the garden, they saw their shame, they saw their nakedness, they ran from God's presence. And now these two disciples sitting at the table with Jesus see grace, and they see the restoration of this new relationship. And then, of course, they see Jesus vanish, which was pretty cool too. But I just love that point, that their eyes were opened and it happened at the table.
I love it. That is so good. Yeah, it's a reversal, the opposite of your eyes being open to your shame and to fully seeing evil and seeing yourself naked and all that they had revealed to them in that moment is not to close your eyes. It's to have your eyes more fully opened to the grace and the gift and the presence of God that he can restore us.
So, we're taking a giant sweep through the Bible, so let's end it in Revelation 19, where we see this great marriage supper of the Lamb. And of course, if that's what this is all about, I view it from the lens of like, it's a rehearsal for what we're going to do. Just like singing, when we sing together, that's a rehearsal for the singing we're going to do in the Lord's presence for all eternity. When we're together with each other and enjoying these meals, this is like a rehearsal that we're going to eventually be involved in this great marriage supper someday at the end of all things. And I don't know. I feel like maybe it's like woohoo, put my Birkenstocks on, but boy, I just like, I love the thought that the table is where God does some of his most amazing work. And how much do we even think about the power that our tables can have, like our physical kitchen tables can have in changing people's lives?
And the idea of the messianic banquet going all the way back to Isaiah, that this is what Christ comes to bring, is threaded through all of the Gospels. Jesus, whenever he talks about heaven, talks about, eating, this is what it's going to be like when you're eating with Jacob and Abraham, and, the miracles of feeding the 5,000 and the multitudes are calling back to that. This is a sign that this messianic feast is coming. The Lord's Supper, of course, is pointing to this fellowship that it's restoring. And all of this is directing us towards, there aren't many things that God uses metaphorically to tell us what the perfection that we have to look forward to is going to be like.
Yeah.
It's kind of like paradise, It's like a city, but it's a different kind of city than you've seen before. The garden, the city. It's also a lot like a feast where you sit down with Jesus and you celebrate that this marriage has fully happened now. And that is really helpful to understand this, why God keeps coming back. We didn't talk about this, but I taught a class last year, I think, or maybe 2 years ago, where we did a biblical theology. Every class took a section of scripture. Let's start with the Pentateuch. Where are all the passages in these first 5 books about table fellowship, eating together, hospitality? Okay, now into the history books. And we went all the way through the Bible doing this and just saying, okay, let's read all of the passages. What do we learn from this? And it was amazing. First of all, how many passages? It's everywhere.
Yeah,
dude.
everywhere.
It's everywhere. But also how theologically rich this idea of eating together is, because like you, I grew up with a very intentional divide made between eating and serving God. And I'm not saying anybody was teaching it that way.
Right.
But it was implicit that there was something that had to be separated out. And so it was really helpful for me to understand the whole thing is about fellowship with God, and that is seen maybe most clearly in eating with him in some way.
Maybe this clears up some of the notions about hospitality, right? As you think about it from this deep lens, like it totally changes what hospitality is. It's not about a performance. It's not about putting on a show or anything like that makes you look good, because that's not the goal. The goal of hospitality is making people feel warm and welcome, and making people feel like I want to feel when God invites me to the table through Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how I want to feel, and I want to make other people feel that way too. And so entertainment can sometimes feel like a big burden. I know if you're like my wife, who I love her to death, but boy, she is very focused on like making sure things are clean and in order, and making sure that there's no dog hair anywhere. And I'm on the other side of the spectrum there, I suppose. Like, suck it up, Buttercup. Like there's dog hair everywhere. The door is open though. Come on in. Like enjoy yourself.
Yep. That's what creates those good parties that you were talking about.
Yeah.
It almost helps.
Yes,
yeah.
The dog hair creates the good parties. I agree with you for sure.
We went from dandruff to dog hair,
It's wonderful.
But I was talking to a couple about this last night, as I know we're wrapping up here, but we had this couple over that I'm going to be officiating in their marriage ceremony not too long from now. And they were saying what they want their home to be. And I was just thinking, Adrian and I were thinking through with them, how are you going to set up your life so you're serving God? So your scripture, prayer, conversations with each other, serving in the church, hospitality are part of it. And they talked about, we don't want anything fancy. We intentionally want it to be cozy and imperfect so that whenever people come over, they just drop their guard and are at home. And I thought, wow, that's pretty wise for a young couple.
It's cabin life.
It's cabin life. And it's simple stuff. It's not entertaining people. Entertaining as both in the idea of making everything fun and amusement, or in the idea of making everything like Martha Stewart perfect.
Yeah.
It is about the simplicity of that time together and the way God blesses. And it's even better when everybody brings a dish, because that's how life is. That's how the church is. It's the potluck of following God.
It's the pitch in of believers. The pitch in.
He has been converted to Indiana terminology.
Oh, man, there's a whole conversation around that. Okay. So maybe a challenge for this week, and I could take it on. I think everybody can take it on. Identify somebody who you only interact with abstractly. Someone who you keep at a distance. Maybe you text them or you talk to them over social media. But if you can, if it's possible for you, invite them over for a meal sometime in the next week or so. And again, it's not about entertaining. It's just about using what you've got in the most simple way you can to make people feel safe and known and to enjoy this fellowship at the table that I think we see so often throughout the Bible. I've appreciated this conversation, if for no other reason than just it's not one I hear a lot of people having. And maybe this has been out of left field for you if you're listening to this, but I hope it's resonated with you in some deeper ways, that this is what this whole thing is all about, is being back at the table with our God.
Amen. Amen. And even when we come together this week with the Lord's people on the first day of the week to take the bread and the fruit of the vine, maybe this will bring some deeper resonance to understand not just that we're remembering Jesus, but that we're communing with him and one another.
Yeah. One last thing from Luke 24 that I'll just bring up. If you don't have a home, also get real good at inviting yourself over to other people's houses. That's also part of the challenge you can take on. Yeah. Jesus did a great job with that with these two disciples. I'm coming over. Okay.
Jesus never had a home. He was always showing up and bringing the party with him.
For sure. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning into the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find us on our website at BibleGeeks.fm. Find show notes for this episode in your podcast player or, on our website as well. And lots of stuff going on in the upcoming weeks here. We're going to be talking about Romans 7 and a whole bunch of stuff here in the future. Love it if you tune in for that conversation as well. And until the next episode, everyone, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.